We now turn to our second speaker for the opposition, James O'Malley, who is a freelance writer and journalist who's written in The Spectator, Politico, The New Statesman, The Telegraph and The Independent. After the Brexit referendum of 2016, he started a petition to declare London independent from the UK, which has almost 200,000 signatures. James, the floor is yours.
Fuck it.
Virtually.
I'm you.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. I can't believe you found the London Independence thing. One day it'll be a reality. Anyway, let me begin tonight by saying I'm enormously sympathetic to the emotional argument being made tonight. I find the idea of breaking up big tech a really appealing idea on a sort of gut emotional level, because I'm just as nervous about the power of big tech as everyone else. I think Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos probably do have too much power concentrated in their hands. And obviously, I recognise that big tech does loads of bad things. We've mentioned several of the sort of bad outcomes from their behaviour already this evening. They behave in monopolistic ways. Apple has an App Store monopoly on the iPhone. Google and Facebook do scary things with our data. The people who work in Amazon warehouses often have to work in difficult conditions for long hours, and that's been hugely controversial as well. And you know, I also recognise the people proposing breaking up big tech are really smart and thoughtful people, as we have seen tonight. In the last election, my favourite candidate, in the last American election, my favourite candidate was Elizabeth Warren, who is probably more synonymous than any other politician around breaking up big tech. So if the proposition that's just to set out my stall to go, I get it. I think I understand the arguments or why people are making these arguments. And if the proposition tonight was, should we regulate big tech really hard, then I would probably be standing on the other side of this debate. But I do think that, to go back to the proposition of breaking up big tech, I think this is a little bit of a red herring. I think because it's such a big issue, because these companies play such important roles in our lives, it's important to be precise and ask ourselves, what problem are we actually trying to solve here? And will this proposed solution actually do anything in order to solve it? And I'm a bit skeptical that breaking up big tech will actually be the magic bullet we want. So let me start by talking on a practical level. So how do we actually break up these companies? So someone on the floor of the union raised this earlier, and this is a really important point, because so let's take Facebook for example. Their acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp created this corporate behemoth. It's an enormous company. WhatsApp and Instagram each have 1 billion users of their own. Facebook has 2 billion. So if you, on a practical level, you were to go, well, let's just break it up. Let's just split them into 3 companies. They'll still be enormous, powerful companies. The problem is, behind the scenes, these 3 platforms, though they look different, are basically very tightly integrated. Since Facebook acquired the companies, they've merged all the back-end infrastructure. When you're sending a WhatsApp message or sending a Facebook Messenger message or direct messaging someone on Instagram, it's the same code on the same servers in the background, which is doing all of that clever stuff. It's basically different window dressing in the form of different apps on the same underlying code. In the same way, so Facebook and Instagram, they share advertising infrastructure behind the scenes, so that advertisers who advertise on Facebook can then put their adverts onto Instagram with the click of a button, is the phrase Facebook uses. It's the same thing. It's not a thing that can be easily separated. Another example of a difficult separation could be Google and YouTube. In this debate over the years, people point to YouTube being the dominant video platform, thinking, well, that could just be carved off of Google, because there's a sort of logic to it, because YouTube is a dominant player in online video, and weirdly, it's actually the 2nd biggest search engine after Google itself. So you'd think that would be a sort of slam dunk case for breaking the 2 apart to sort of stimulate competition. But the problem is, they ultimately, again, under the hood, they basically are very similar. So YouTube's recommendation algorithm, that's the reason, when it says, you've watched this, now watch this, and the reason you're, oh, okay, just one more video, just one more video, just one more video. The reason that works is because it's powered by what Google call Google Brain. This is the company's sort of generalized artificial intelligence system. So again, like the example with Facebook Messenger and Instagram Messenger and WhatsApp, it's again sort of slightly different shop fronts on much of the same sort of thing inside and under the hood. So, sorry, that's a mixed metaphor, but I'm sure you get the gist of what I'm saying there. So, simply put, while it might be sort of moderately straightforward in the sort of analog world to divide up a company that seems like a monopoly, so look at like the breakup of big oil or the telecoms in the United States in the last century, there was a sense and a logic to that, because you could do it by geography or by different business units in the company and stuff like that, and separate them out into different companies. But the nature of software is you write one piece of code once, and then you use that piece of code everywhere, and everything sort of is stuck together. So I think drawing them apart is actually a really difficult, really practical question. So if we are going to break up big tech, we need to actually figure out how to do it. So my second point this evening is, let's just imagine that problem goes away. I don't know. Regulators are very clever people. Politicians are clever people. I'm sure they can figure out a way to do it, maybe. My question then would be, though it would feel sort of really satisfying to see Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos knock down a peg or two, the smile wipes off of their faces. But how would it actually solve the underlying issues that we have with big tech? So look at Amazon, for example. I think one of the easier cases, or the more sort of logical cases for breaking a company apart, could be Amazon, because it's basically two companies in one. One half of Amazon is focused on retail and logistics. It's Amazon.com. It's the shopping site that we all know about and have used relentlessly during the pandemic. The other half of Amazon is maybe less well known outside of the tech world, is Amazon Web Services. It's Amazon's cloud platform. It's the digital plumbing that now runs an enormous swathe of the internet. And it's actually where Amazon makes most of its profits, or it's actually, it's bigger than the shopping side of Amazon, if you can believe that. And this infrastructure, this Amazon Web Services, actually sits underneath everything from Netflix to Twitter to Facebook. They all use Amazon Web Services. And so you might think, well, these could be two separate companies. What's wrong with that? But the problem is, in a lot of different domains, technology tends towards sort of natural monopolies. So imagine you had two different Amazons, one web services, one doing the shopping. Then I don't know how that would sort of stimulate competition in either of those domains, because ultimately, AWS would still be the dominant cloud platform, and then the dominant online retailer would still be Amazon. It wouldn't make either of those markets more competitive, as they still have dominant players. And let's say, I don't know, the person breaking up big tech, the person taking the axe down, took a more granular approach. Let's say they looked at what an earlier speaker raised, that was Amazon operating a two-sided marketplace, but then also selling its own products. Amazon has its own sort of white label, own brand stuff, a bit like a supermarket has its own brand products alongside other stuff. And one of the criticisms Amazon has received over the years is, well, does it secretly favor its own products? Does, when you search for something generic, like, oh, you need a new charger for your phone, is it saying, well, buy the Amazon charger for your phone before those of marketplace sellers? Maybe, okay, fine. You could say to Amazon, fine, you can no own brand stuff. That's got to be a separate company. Spin it off, sell it off, cut it off, however Amazon want to do it. But then ultimately, Amazon still control and own the marketplace. They still set the rules of the market, and so sellers, they're still the layer that sits between the customer and the seller, and that's still an enormously powerful position for them to be in. So I'm not entirely sure how that would sort of weaken Amazon's monopoly power in that respect. And then there's also the issue, I think, of, again, and the problem with tending to monopoly, I think the biggest and best example of this is with Facebook. So imagine Facebook and Instagram somehow were separated apart. Then what's to stop Mark Zuckerberg from launching a brand new photo sharing app and then using the 2 billion strong Facebook audience, which is just on the normal Facebook app, to drive users to it? What's to stop the Facebook app going, hey, here's Facebook's new Instagram 2, or whatever they call it. And it's hard to imagine, but this is basically exactly what Facebook did when they failed to buy Snapchat. So a few years ago, Snapchat was doing really well. That Facebook tried to buy them. Snapchat unusually said no to a big money offer. So what Facebook did, they basically, let's say they were inspired by some of the functionality of Snapchat and integrated a feature called Stories into Instagram. This was a thing Snapchat invented that why Snapchat was growing. But now Instagram does it, and everyone uses stories on Instagram. I say everyone. I'm over 30, so I've never used a story in my life. But that's why, as far as I understand it, everyone uses Instagram, and they basically just destroyed Snapchat, and it's basically a virtual irrelevance. Because the problem is when you've got these sort of natural monopolies and these network effects, then winning begets winning. So even without Instagram, Facebook is still a long way ahead. And if Instagram was a separate company, yes, there'd be a fight, but one of them would eventually win. One of them would eventually get to the point where all of your friends are on one of the platforms versus the other, or slightly more, and that would have a snowballing effect. So you just end up a few years down the line with, oh, you've got another big monopoly player. So to me, that doesn't make much sense. Yeah, and like, even if you could break things up in a smarter way, and I'm sorry if I'm pushing for time here. Let's say you could split Facebook's advertising section off into a separate company or something. I don't really know quite how this would work, but the problem, that wouldn't solve any of the problems if you could hive off a bit of functionality. Because the problem with Facebook isn't like how they're giving advertisers a raw deal or something like that, because people talk about Facebook's advertising power. The problem is that Facebook has consumed the entire public square and can now regulate speech and the boundaries of acceptable discourse and control our lives to a far greater extent. Simply breaking up parts of the company or breaking something up doesn't solve that problem, when again the network effects, the fact that everyone will just naturally get together to, I guess, argue in the same place, that's all I tend to do on Facebook, is a sort of a natural phenomenon. So again, I don't think breaking up works there. And finally, for my last point, I want to make maybe the most sort of counterintuitive point this evening, which is sometimes in tech, and I need to be very careful saying this, a monopoly can be a good thing. And I think the example of this is actually Apple's battle at the moment with Epic Games over the App Store. So Epic Games, they make Fortnite. Their complaint is that Apple have too much control in the App Store. They force merchants on the App Store to give Apple a 30% cut. They decide what apps go on there. They set the rules and all this sort of thing. Apple play a very powerful role. Like they have a monopoly over apps that run on the iPhone. But the problem is, well, the thing is, the benefit is, this actually is brilliant for security. It means that you can buy an iPhone, even if you know nothing about computing, even if you're, you don't need to care. If you go on the App Store and search for Netflix and download an app called Netflix, you know that's real, 100% legit Netflix. That's not some dodgy scam app. Also, it's just been called Netflix. And by Apple having this dominant role where they set the rules and enforce everything, that means we've got that trust, and that's what arguably has enabled the iPhone and mobile phones more generally to grow just as much as their portability. They're this reliable thing we can trust our entire digital lives with. Years ago, before the old way of doing computing with Windows and things being more open, and there are virtues to that approach, but it just meant, I remember I'd want to download a bit of software to do something. I'd just download some random app from the internet, click on whatever it is .exe, and goodness knows what that could have done to my computer, because there was no way of vetting that code. So there is a sort of benefit there. So again, I'll skip over the end. I think I've probably gone over my allotted time, but basically my argument is this. I get it. I think the emotional case is there. I understand big tech is a problem and we need to do something. And ultimately, that's going to involve a more fine-grained approach. It's going to be about looking at the different impacts big tech has on the world and working out, should we be regulating that and how should that be regulated? I think breaking up big tech, again, it's an appealing phrase, it's an appealing idea emotionally, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It's just a nice sounding phrase until someone can work out how to actually do it and whether it will actually do anything. So maybe we need to be more like Silicon Valley, ironically, and think of a more sort of innovative solution to this problem instead. Thank you.